The Ghost of Silverlode, Part E. Teety has got the Ghost of Silverlode tied to a tombstone in Boot Hill, I shouted at Uncle Mark. Let's hurry before the ghost gets loose. Uncle Mark didn't waste any more words. We galloped off towards Silverlode. Tom was waiting at the corner of Whiskey Row and Corey Street for us. Did the ghost get away? I asked as I slipped off the rump of the horse. No, Tom said. I walked up the trail just a minute or so ago, and he is still tied to the tombstone. Papa and Uncle Mark dismounted, with Papa glaring at Tom. I'll deal with you later, Papa said. My great brain did it, Tom said proudly. If it is a real ghost, you can interview it, and that will make you a famous journalist. Then Tom shook his head. But my great brain keeps telling me there is no such thing as a ghost. That is why I sent for you and Uncle Mark, so you could lock up in jail whoever it is that has been scaring kids and grown-ups with this ghost business. Then we walked to the end of Corey Street and started up the trail to Boot Hill. I wonder who the poor fool is, Uncle Mark said, and surprised me by laughing. It would serve him right if we left him there until morning. It is the ghost of Mr. Tinker, I said. He came up from the grave just like he did last night. Last night? Papa asked. It gets worse and worse. We came to the end of the trail to where we could plainly see the ghost tied to the tombstone. I assure you, John, Uncle Mark said, that it isn't the ghost of Mr. Tinker. The ghost must have heard us. Whoever you are, get me out of this, he shouted. Uncle Mark began to laugh softly as we walked to the tombstone. He was still laughing as he untied the lariat. Let's see what we've got here, Uncle Mark said as he lifted the sheet off the ghost. As I live and breathe, if it isn't Steve Smith, the old ghost storyteller himself, caught in his own trap. And sure enough, there was Seth's uncle, looking as if he wished he really was a ghost and could disappear. I was only trying to help, he said. Then he got angry. You were one of those who encouraged this Ghost of Silverlode business. Guilty, Uncle Mark said, but I only did it to make sure the kids in town don't dare come here and end up like the Knutson and Bartell boy. I didn't come here and run around the cemetery with a sheet on. I had to do it, Steve Smith said. Yesterday my nephew told me that he and some other boys were coming here after curfew last night. I figured I'd give them such a scare that he would never come here again. Well, I did give all those kids such a scare last night by pretending to be a ghost. I didn't think any of them would ever dare set foot in this ghost town again. That is understandable, Uncle Mark said sympathetically. But when my nephew told me after supper tonight that one boy still wasn't convinced there was a ghost and they were coming here again tonight, Steve Smith said, I thought if I pretended to be the ghost of Silverlode one more time, it would convince even this boy there was a ghost. Then he looked at Papa as if he wanted to take a punch at my father. But that son of yours wasn't satisfied to see and hear a ghost 2 nights in a row. He had to capture a ghost. I'm sorry, Mr. Smith, Tom said, but my great brain wouldn't rest until I found out if there were a really ghost or not. If it was real, I wanted to interview it and find out all about ghosts so my father could print the story in the Advocate. And it would make him famous. And if the ghost was a fake, I wanted to prove to the other kids that there was no such thing as a ghost. I'm glad I don't live in Aidenville, Mr. Smith said. When this story gets out, I doubt if I'll ever even come here to visit my brother and his family again. Nobody will ever know except us, Uncle Mark said. If the story got out, every kid in Aidenville would start making this ghost town a playground, and that could lead to another tragedy. Then Uncle Mark put his hand on Tom's shoulder. You and John are going to tell a hair-raising tale of what happened here tonight. You are going to say when you tried to lasso the ghost, the lariat went right through him. You are going to say the ghost caught you both and threatened to take you back into his grave with him if you ever set foot in Silverlode again. But that would be lying, Uncle Mark, Tom said. And besides, I'd have to admit my great brain was wrong, and there really are ghosts. Papa had been standing with his cheeks so blown up I thought he'd take off like a balloon. You and J.D. will do exactly as your Uncle Mark says, Papa said. This ghost town must be strictly off limits to every boy in Aidenville. Now give me your word as a Fitzgerald that you both will do as your uncle has suggested. Tom sure looked disappointed. All right, Papa, he said. Word of honor. Me too, I said. Uncle Mark looked at Seth's uncle. I suppose you came on a horse, he said. I hid it in back of the old miners' hotel, Steve Smith said, and thanks, Marshall, for keeping this story a secret. I rode behind Papa and Tom behind Uncle Mark until we stopped in front of our house. We slid off over the rumps of the horses. Papa dismounted and handed the reins of the horse to Uncle Mark. Then my uncle looked down at Tom. I will sort of hate seeing you leave for Salt Lake City in a couple weeks, he said. Then he rode down Main Street, laughing as if he'd just told a very funny joke. Mama and Aunt Bertha began hugging Tom and making a fuss over him when we entered the parlor. I was as much a part of the adventure as my brother, but they just ignored me. Papa walked his rocking chair and slumped down in it. He put his head between his hands, and his head began swaying back and forth as if he had a terrible headache. Finally, he looked up at Tom. I don't know what I'm going to do with you, he said. The boys are safe, Mama said, and let us thank their guardian angels for that. We have one son who is absolutely deaf in his left ear, Papa said as he pointed at Tom. What